All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Warnicki, and I'm a composer from Raleigh, North Carolina. And today I wanted to talk about a subgenre of music that I really like a lot, and I don't really hear anybody on earth talking about it, and it's classical disco music. There weren't very many disco classical songs, actually, but we're going to examine just a few of them in this video and talk about what classical disco actually was, what impact it had on music, and really if there's any need for future classical disco music in the world. So let's dive into it. So disco music, right? The octave bass on the left hand, doom 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 doom, sort of the 1 2 3 4, typically you have drums that sound like that, bass that's doing octaves, and some sort of catchy lyrics about dancing, typically. Big bands from the disco area include Chic, the Bee Gees, Hughes Corporation, Lip Sync. There was a lot of huge disco songs, and really, disco actually wasn't around for that long. Really, disco was only popular for maybe 5, 6, 7 years in total between about 1974 until about maybe 1981. And obviously there were, sort of songs that were danceable before 1974. Obviously there were disco songs that happened after 1981. But I feel that really even in 1979, there was a huge backlash to disco music because it had been just so popular and kind of, in some ways, corny and overplayed in certain regards. But really, by 1979, disco had tanked. And there were a few more hit songs really in 1980 and 1981 in that genre, but new wave music really overtook disco as the primary popular, new music style by at least 1981. And so it was a very short period of time, kind of between the song Rock the Boat by the Hughes Corporation and maybe Funky Town in 1980. Maybe that was the last huge disco song. You could argue, of course, songs like It's Raining Men by the Weather Girls, later, of course, were disco songs as well. I don't deny that. But the popularity and the sales, on the Billboard charts had dramatically declined by 1979. Take the Bee Gees, for example. For a little bit of time, when really Mr. Natural, that album came out, and then the year after, the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, and then going all the way up to, Spirits Having Flown in 1979. These were monster, enormously huge albums for the Bee Gees. The Bee Gees were absolutely on top of the world for those, 3-4 years right there between 76 and 79. They were stunningly untouchable. They were, economic powerhouses. These guys were selling tens of millions of records. And so, of course, everybody and their mother wanted to get in on the disco craze. And so for whatever, let's talk about the reasons here, right? Why was disco music so popular between 74 and really 1980? Well, I think really what it comes down to is that it made people feel good. Disco music inherently was upbeat, kind of fast-paced, exciting. It was sing-alongable. There were so many things that people could enjoy about disco music. You know what I mean? You could think about the big disco songs, right? Night Fever by the Bee Gees, whatever, even the lame songs like Disco Duck, you know what I mean? The parody songs were upbeat and exciting. And when you listen to that music and you allow yourself to give it a chance, you get into it, the doom, 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 doom. Disco music is incredibly fun. And that's really what it came down to, is that people were going out and they were having fun listening to it. There was a lot of bad things that were happening culturally in the 70s, with the Vietnam War sort of earlier on that had just ended. And there was a lot of uncertainty about where the country was going. And disco music served as an escape for millions of people around the world. It allowed them to kind of enter a place where the problems of the world weren't real, and all there was at this moment was the beat, the groove, having fun, being with your friends. Disco music represented freedom in a lot of ways. It represented fun. It represented humanity. You know what I mean? There was so much inhumanity happening in the world out there that it was just this really worldwide response to what was happening in the world. Disco music was an answer to the problems of the world, and for a few years it really, really was exceptional. You can even think Kiss, of course, got on the disco bandwagon with "I Was Made for Loving You." ELO, of course, the Electric Light Orchestra, got on the disco bandwagon with "Last Train to London" and "Don't Bring Me Down." There are so many bands, that did not have sort of a disco style that was experimenting with disco in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, because of how extremely popular that it was. Let's think of some more bands, that tried a disco style. Queen with Another One Bites the Dust. Doom, doom, doom. Boom, 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 boom. Extremely popular song. In fact, it was their biggest song ever, written by their bass player, John Deacon, who is filthy rich to this day as a result of the song Another One Bites the Dust. But that's besides the point, right? There's so many bands that were experimenting with the disco sound, and some of them have sort of disavowed that, right? Now that disco is sort of not as popular, but it was a wonderful, wonderful time for people to be making music, and there were a lot of really fantastic songs that emerged in the disco era. And so let's talk about classical music and disco now. Symphony orchestras in different cities, we're seeing the response that disco is having on the charts. And I think that quite frankly, a lot of people were choosing, to go to discotheques at night instead of choosing to go to the opera house or to go to the symphony hall. And so some composers and, some symphony orchestras decided that they would do disco themselves. They would put on disco concerts where they would do different classical songs in a disco style. And so this kind of thing was happening in the mid, kind of 70s, 1976, 1977. And then something big happened in 1976, in my opinion. Walter Murphy released the song A Fifth of Beethoven on the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. Now, that song was a monster hit, not only because it was included on the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, but even independently. It was played on the radio constantly. In fact, it's still played on the radio quite a lot. It's a very fun, awesome song. And so Walter Murphy sort of opened the floodgates to classical disco. Almost immediately after that, you get Hooked on Classics, right? Extremely popular disco classical fusion record that we'll listen to together in a couple minutes. We had things like Arthur Fiedler, who was the conductor of the Boston Pops. He did Saturday Night Fiedler, which was like a sort of a tribute to the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, from the Boston Pops. It was wonderful. Even Star Wars, which of course John Williams, we know, was very inspired by classical music, Stravinsky and so many others for the Star Wars soundtrack. A guy named Meco took a medley of Star Wars songs, mixed them all together, composed it, had it recorded, of course, with a great symphony orchestra, and released it. And this Star Wars disco record went gangbusters as well, sold millions of copies. Honestly, it was a huge deal. And so for a couple of years, there were huge disco classical records that came out, and they were exposing people to classical music at that time. Kids were buying a lot of disco records and not as many classical records. And so it played an important role, number one, not only in sort of satisfying an audience hunger for classical disco music, right, by providing these things to people, but, it also validated disco music as a relevant art style. This wasn't just a campy, kitschy kind of nonsense that anyone could do. It required talent and skill to be able to make excellent sounding classical disco records. And so I just wanted to mention this, a little bit of a history about classical disco music, mention, the excellent Hooked on Classics album, mention Walter Murphy's excellent A Fifth of Beethoven, Meco's Star Wars, and we're going to dive even more. We're going to see if we can uncover some classical disco songs that I've never heard of before, and we're going to listen to them today and kind of react to them and just talk about and celebrate classical disco music just for a moment. Hi everybody, and welcome back. We are now in my living room, and we're going to listen to a song by a guy called Walter Murphy, and the song is called A Fifth of Beethoven. Now, this was on the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. And by the way, before I go any further, I just want to point out that I have two cockatiels, Pedro and Pikachu, and they have a lot of thoughts about classical disco as well, and so you might potentially hear my cockatiels, and so I apologize in advance like that. All right, so what's interesting about this song, A Fifth of Beethoven, is that Walter Murphy's going to take the opening bars of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which normally is in C minor, so you'd have G to E flat, like that, and then F down to D, but he takes it a semitone lower, so now we're in the key of B minor. So we're going to have now G flat down to D, like that, and then E down to, C sharp, like that. And so then after that, the whole thing is going to keep doing this like little ostinato pattern of D down to B, like that, while he does improvisations. So let's listen to this song right here. Let's see what we think about this. So here's that pattern, D down to B. Same material, half step lower. Now this is a new section, this build up right here to repeat the pattern. Really, really wonderful moment. It really lends itself actually to the dance format quite well. And this is cool, this clavichord solo. The birds like it. This is cool. Ba-da-bop, ba-da. Now this was definitely not in the Fifth Symphony. This is his own creation right here, but this is a cool part. Yeah, and then he just loops it. So very cool what he did with this song. It's definitely a part him and part Beethoven, and a very cool like way to kind of kick off this fad of disco classical music. And I don't know if it's true, but I think Walter Murphy was the first guy that had a big hit with disco classical music with this song. All right, so the next album that we're going to listen to is actually from 1981. I thought it was from a few years before that, but I was wrong. This album is called Hooked on Classics, and this was Lewis Clark conducting the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. And so this is an interesting album, a little bit different than the one that we listened to a second ago, Walter Murphy, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So let's listen. Big sound. And right after that opening right there, the drum beat kicks in. You can hear a bass guitar, an electric bass guitar. I think I hear an electric guitar as well, chugging some power chords. Yeah, there's that disco bass, that octave bass thing. Some Swan Lake. And so what you can kind of hear about this album really is that essentially they're taking medleys, you know, snippets, excerpts of the most popular parts of these big works, these big famous works, you know, by people like Mozart and Tchaikovsky and Wagner, and they're just putting a drum beat and an electric guitar and electric bass over it really, sort of adding just a band on top of it. And it's an interesting kind of approach, right, to do it this way, because obviously in the liner notes they're probably going to say what the name of the full piece is for each little excerpt, right? And so if somebody really likes something when they bought this, right, they're going to go out and go to the classical section in the record store and try to find that specific recording, whether it's Carmen or whether it's, you know, the Carmina Burana, whatever it might be. And so they have, you know, probably, I'd say 100 clips, you know, excerpts of really huge pieces in this Hooked on Classics album. So let's listen to here's the fifth. It's in the original key of C minor. Okay, cool. And there they get out of it. Ein Klein Night Music. Beethoven's Ninth. In the original key. I'm surprised. You'd think that there'd be more pieces that were transposed, you know, in different keys to make it all work. But I'm really surprised. I'm really surprised that so many pieces are in the original key. Maybe even all of them. Wow. You can really hear that bass guitar chugging on those eighth notes. So some thoughts about this. Really the challenging part about that was taking those excerpts and making them flow together nicely, and of course figuring out sort of a different bass line, on the electric bass for these things right there that probably doubles, what the original cello or maybe double bass would have done. I don't necessarily know, but it seems like there wasn't as much work that would have went into the Hooked on Classics album as there was with the Walter Murphy record. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but so it's interesting there, that how mostly it's the original songs in the original key with a recording, of a drum beat over it, kind of like an early version of a remix before computers were around really in music that much. So very interesting. Now we're going to move on to another piece of classical disco. All right, so here's a song that's called Symphony by a band called Xenon, and this is actually Italian disco from the year 1984. So I don't think this necessarily sold a huge amount of copies. I've never heard of it in my life, so I'm going to listen to this for the first time. It's about 5 minutes long, and I'm going to give some reactions to the song Symphony by Xenon. And by the way, this was recorded apparently at Sandy's recording studios, so that's interesting. It's written by M. Massini and R. Booty. Never heard of these guys before, Xenon, but kind of a nice piece. I mean, it's a little bit maybe repetitive. It kind of keeps doing the same thing over and over again, but I do like it a lot, and I don't know if it necessarily qualifies as the genre that we're going for, but it gets an honorable mention for today. I think that maybe to be qualified as classical disco, in my mind, maybe there should be one violin in there, but it's all synth, but very interesting. So let's look at another piece here. All right, so this is really interesting to me. I had no clue about this. Walter Murphy, the man that we just listened to a few minutes ago, the guy that did a fifth of Beethoven, turns out he did an entire album called the Disco Symphony of nothing but disco instrumentals. So we've got 6 songs on it, and we're going to listen to it. I'm excited about this. I had no idea that this existed. All right, so let's listen to this. Walter Murphy's Disco Symphony. That is funky. We got the girls playing the violin on the cover. We know it's going to be real classical disco. Ooh, and there's where he introduces it. So this is interesting because this is totally different. He sets up a groove at first, an original groove, and then incorporates the melody on top of it. That's exciting. That's different. So already we've seen like 3 different ways of doing classical disco. We've got the direct medley, we've got the variation from the original note, we've got the original beat with then different medleys on top of it. Wow. Drum break. Wow, that was pretty cool. That was really cool. Now I have to say, out of all the songs on this album, the one that I really want to hear is Bolero, because I really love Bolero. I love Maurice Ravel. Let's listen to Bolero. Disco Bolero, which I didn't even know was an option until right now. All right, here we go. Bolero by Walter Murphy. Wow. Wow. I love this. And listen to the guitar. That jangling. That's a great sound. The jangling guitar. It's so fun just doing 16th notes on a guitar. Like, hold on a second. Alright, so this is C. So it's supposed to be a C minor. A C major. Very cool, wow. Bum bum bum. Bum bum bum. I love the way that this builds up too. Ooh, what an ending. All right, so the last song that we're going to listen to today is one that I think belongs here. Now, the Star Wars soundtrack was a monster success for John Williams and for George Lucas, and really for symphony orchestras all over the world. I read a statistic the other day that something like 40 to 60% of all orchestra ticket purchases every year come from performances of Star Wars or other John Williams music. And so, of course, somebody got into the classical music disco game with Star Wars. So this guy's name was Meco, M-E-C-O, and I don't know what Meco looks like. I don't know what country Meco is from, but this album was a really big hit. It's called Star Wars, and Other Galactic Funk by Meco, but I call it Star Wars Disco. So we're going to listen to this today because Star Wars is so classical inspired, and I think it just, like I said, really belongs here, and I think that we need to talk about Star Wars Disco. So let's listen. Bum, 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 bum. Now, what key is this in? In the key of C major. Nice. You hear those laser sound effects? That's so cool. Ba 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 ba. Interesting. Ba ba dum ba ba dum. Very exciting song. All right. Oh, the birds like those beeping sounds, the blazer sounds. They're going nuts up there. They love this. Hold on, let me pause it. Guys, it's okay. You can stop screaming. The transitions also between the parts in this Meco song, the Star Wars Disco, is so good. The beat is strong. There's so much going on with the bass. My birds adore it. That's so cool. And there again is the reemergence of the main theme. A little bit of a binary sunset appearance in there in the key, I think, of A minor. Of course, the relative minor to C major, which is what this piece is in. So Meco knew what he was doing. A little bit of that Princess Leia love theme. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. That's a cool sound right there. I think that's a guitar. More R2-D2. Bass vibration, that's cool. More of that binary sunset theme. Let's see if it's still in the same key. Nope. Now this was a very big hit in and of itself, the Cantina song. But I really, really enjoy what Meco's done with this here. Ba-na, 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 ba-na. The bass really works here, that bass guitar, wow. Another excellent transition out of it with that binary sunset theme. Yes. The bass still really owning it. Boom, scale out of there. Still have no clue where we're gonna go next. That's one of the exciting things about this, is you just never know what's going to come next. Ooh. So suspended chords right here. Those bells. Now we're in the key of D major. I love this ending. Wow. So there you guys have it. Meco, Star Wars Disco. Star Wars and Other Galactic Funk by Meco, the specific name of the album. I am pretty amazed by it. You know, it's so much fun to listen to. Each part is so unexpected. The transition between each part is so good and so well done. The transposition of the keys to make the whole thing work was really in service to the music, and I think it was just such a great a representation of this subgenre of music, you know, the classical disco subgenre, and, you know, this immersion by adding the, you know, the lightsaber sounds and the R2-D2 sounds is so cool. And so Meco, you know, I don't know who Meco is, but I just really think that this is a great record. It's so much fun. You know, for a short period, you know, between 1976 and 1984, which is the range of the videos that we listened to earlier, you know, there was so much like economic activity happening because of disco. And, you know, of course, the classical, you know, subgenre wanted to get in there, just like there was so many other collaborations between rock and jazz and disco. And, you know, I think that it's unfortunate that it's kind of fallen by the wayside, that people don't really care about classical disco anymore. But it's a lot of fun. And, you know, there was just so much good stuff that was out there and so much potential, you know, that maybe could have been. But I just wanted to spend a little bit of time today and just talk about this subgenre of classical disco and mention some examples and just kind of share them because, it makes me feel pretty happy. All right, everybody. Thank you for checking out the video. If there are any classical disco songs that you like that I didn't cover in this video, please leave a comment in the chat and let me know about it. I'd definitely like to hear it. And let me know if you guys have any thoughts about any of the songs in here as well. And I'll see you guys in a future video. Thank you.